value of an idea lies in the using of it. With that as the theme, welcome to our Zoom web series hosted by One Tree Hill and PMS Cart on the Juggernauts, conversations with uncommon and curious fund managers. We have with us today Anirudh Damani, managing partner at Artha Venture Fund. Welcome, Anirudh, to the Juggernauts.
Hey, thank you so much. It's interesting that juggernaut actually means an unstoppable force. And in Hindi, the word Anirudh also means an unstoppable force.
Great.
So there you go. You named the show after me. So glad to be here.
Excellent. Hopefully, we'll make some good conversations.
Absolutely. Looking forward to it.
And Anirudh, if you're ready, what we like to dive into is what we call a machine gun 15.
Okay.
Fire round of questions. Let me know what pops up in your head, and hopefully it'll make you think 1 or 2 seconds more than you generally do.
Done. I'm ready.
What is the motivation for today's investor?
Money. Make money.
Has that changed over time? Will it change over time?
Investors always have to make money.
Excellent. Who do you think, Trump or Biden, from an India perspective?
Biden to Biden to Trump.
Okay. When will India have its 10th Decacon?
4 years.
4 years? Interesting. Okay.
2024.
2024. Okay. What are the 2 most important or interesting trends that you're seeing post-COVID in the startup universe?
So I think first of all, you're seeing definitely a very strong focus now on unit economics. I think now more so than ever. But what's happened because of the pandemic is that those businesses that were losing money at an operating level, those are businesses typically where the unit economics are negative, those businesses completely got destroyed. So now the focus is that at least at the unit economic level, make money. It's okay to lose money at a company level, but you can't be making operating losses and then calling that growth. I think another thing that is also being witnessed is the the focus that the Indian startups have this ability to go abroad, right? And they're not just constricted to India, right? And especially on that B2B SaaS end, I think that has become even I guess more prevalent today, simply because these companies have actually been able to go abroad and do business without crossing borders. Something what we were talking about before this recording started, that the pandemic has just made it easier now for us to transact without meeting people. So in the same way, now you can have an overseas sales force without actually being there.
So you're saying that there is a lot of opportunity outside of India. COVID has sort of accelerated it. But from a government perspective, in your opinion at least, are they doing enough to enable startups to do this?
I think India has no restrictions when you want to bring foreign exchange into India, right?
Right.
The usual issues have obviously been when you want to send foreign exchange outside of India, and I think that stems from our, imperial past, right? We've always been a country with very limited foreign reserves. I was just reading some report this morning that India now has the highest ever foreign reserves in its own history. We're almost at almost $560 billion worth of forex in hand. So I think you definitely are going to see some sort of easing there. Another issue that also crops up, is that a lot of corrupted money has left India in the past, right? And I think that's what the government is concerned about. They want to be free, fair, and allow entrepreneurship to flourish, but they also want to ensure that no political or otherwise faction takes control of these laws. Something that angel tax came out of, right? And then abuse them, and then when they have to bring down the hammer, or they're forced to bring down the hammer by the courts, then it applies to everybody, right? Then suddenly everybody gets painted with the same brush. So they're being cautious, which is good, rather than being reckless, right? Because then, if you remember what happened with the angel tax, a couple of political parties misused that for corrupt purposes, and then suddenly the resultant law was applicable on everybody, and it screwed all of us, right? And we are still dealing with that, 12 years after the event happened. So you can think about the government now saying, I want to open up, but I don't want to be in a position where I open up, don't really think about everything, how this could go wrong, and then come back and have to paint everybody red, and then again lead to issues like angel tax.
You're part of one of India's well-known family office out there, and just wanted to understand from your perspective as well, what is the primary driver from a family office perspective? We've got multiple answers of capital preservation, capital acceleration. Which part of the world do you fall in?
See, there's something known as the three generation curse, right? So the first generation earns it, second generation preserves it, third generation squanders it. And I think you've obviously seen that if you look at some of India's most well-known families, right? You've seen that kind of a progression where every subsequent generation has not been able to manage the efforts of the previous generation. And I think in a good way, the new wealth that got created over the last 25, 30 years since 1991, they've realized very quickly that if we don't take care of how we structure this wealth for the next generation and get them ready for handling the scale of the business that is being created, it could very well get out of hand, right? And also, brings his experience or the things he studied into that business to take it forward. And there are excellent examples like the DuPont family and even other families where they've been able to do this, right, globally. So the good thing is the Indian families can just join some of these amazing family networks. I'm part of one called Camden, and they can meet these families, understand structures, and then build them to themselves. I think that's what the family office is about: is to create a nice way of two generations working together, communicating with each other, and ensuring that the wealth that was passed on is maintained and it does not get squandered.
Perfect. Moving back to sort of the startup world, you mentioned unit economics post a COVID world, but what are the two other sort of big red flags that you look out for when evaluating startups at any stage?
I think when red flags, I mean, obviously there's many things, but let me just say a couple of things that I think founders that really stick out for me, right? If a founder doesn't know his numbers, right? If he's not in the habit of getting the numbers reviewed every single week, right? For himself, he may not report it back to investors. That's a different thing. But when we come into a company, we're on the board. I inculcate the habit that I want to see the numbers every week, but that's not for me. I'm just putting him into the habit of watching the numbers every single week. And after about 6 months, I don't need to see the numbers anymore. Because honestly, it's not about reporting to me; it's about reporting to yourself, right? So if you're not, if the founder is not doing that or resists doing that, I know that venture is doomed. It's not going to work because that person not on top of his. It never works that way, right? And I think that really, I mean, if a founder resists that, and we test for it very, very early, if they're resisting reporting, right? Okay. That venture is doomed for sure, because that means they themselves are not interested in understanding what's happening in the business, right? And me sort of doing that is not for me; it's for them at the end of the day, right? I'm gonna listen. For me, I'm gonna 18 months. If the venture doesn't work out, I'm gone, right? I'm an investor. I'm going to move on to other things. Right. But this is their life, right? And if they're not checking in on their life, once a week at least, if not twice a week, then where are they headed? And great examples of how this has worked out. So I think that's a big red flag. I mean, reporting. Okay. Great book called Measure What Matters, by John Doerr. Most of our founders have read it or are reading it right now. So definitely a book to read. And I think another red flag that I would say is that a founder who has deep trouble getting rid of people, right? And I don't use that as a negative word. I use this more like saying that if you have somebody who's not working out, it's not a team fit, or it's just somebody that is not going to be is not doing well for the team, right? If you have trouble firing people, right? Again, a very big red flag for me that this founder is going to allow people that do not work out to stick around. It's not doing them any favor. Trust me, because if the company doesn't work out or somebody else comes and takes over and becomes their boss, and then this guy has to be let go, you've just wasted whatever amount of time you kept him around for. You just wasted his time. This person could have been a better fit somewhere else. So you kept him around. So you've done a disservice to him. You've done a disservice to yourself, and you've done a disservice to the company. So any founder who has trouble saying, what, and I'm not saying that you hire somebody and fire them right away. Obviously, you train, you give them enough chances. But if after a period of time you're seeing this person is not going to work out and you're afraid to pull the trigger because you're more interested in being a good friend than being a good boss,
Sure.
right? Then that person again, I don't see how you build an enterprise like that, right? Because
Got it.
you can't let people that are not working out stick around because they will take down those people that actually are good for the business, right?
Fair enough. So mainly related to the founders outside
Yeah.
of what we'd already talked about.
So
Interesting.
at the early stage, it's all about the founder, right? I know the idea, the idea is going to change, it's going to pivot. I know everything else is going to happen, but the founder is going to stick around. So for me, those
Sure.
two things are most important.
Sure. Fair. Uh, Moving on to specifically you, Anirudh. What is that one aspect that very few people know about you?
Oh wow. I think that maybe the major thing that may not know is that I'm an avid scuba diver, love the water.
Interesting.
So my friends believe that I would not go for any vacation with them unless it was close to water. But I got into scuba diving about after I did my exit in the US. That's when I got into scuba diving. To my first scuba dive after that, and I've been a avid diver ever since. So
And what's your favorite dive spot?
so far, it has been the spot in obviously the first dive you never forget. I mean, it's like your first kiss, right? You never forget that. But so which was in Puerto Vallarta in the south of Mexico.
Okay.
Uh,
The
but
first kiss or the first dive?
the first dive,
Okay.
but first kiss was first kiss was. Well, we'll talk about that later. Let's keep that off record. Uh, but uh, uh, but in that sense, I think my favorite dive was in a spot in Egypt where it is called Elphiston, I think,
Okay.
and it's supposed to be one of the top 5 dive sites in the world, and completely agree. I was just recently in Andamans before the lockdown, and I think Andamans is just gorgeous. I think it's. I just hope it doesn't get overdosed and the coral doesn't get hurt. But the
Right.
size of fish in Andamans is unbelievable. It is the biggest fish. I mean, there are fishes that were bigger than me, and these are herbivores fish that you're swimming with, and they're much bigger than you are.
Right.
And you've not seen. I mean, I've not seen fish like this anywhere in the world. So
Got it.
we are
Got it.
completely amazed.
Excellent. Excellent. Superb. And to sort of, round this part at least, are you an optimist, pessimist, or realist?
I would say I'm really optimistic.
Great. So we've come to the end of Machine Guns 15.
Awesome.
I'd like to say, you come up with flying colors, and hopefully your coffee with colored hamper should reach you as soon as we reach 100% in cinema halls.
Oh wow.
Occupancy at least. Uh, but on that, and you mentioned startups always need to pivot when things change, etc. Are we seeing a lot more startups pivot their business models because of COVID-19, or is just natural sort of progression to be on that learning curve?
I mean, so to your point, yeah, I think there's few categories of changes that are happening. There are some startups which were forced into the change, right? What I mean by that is, you know, in the last 6 months, we've added, more people to the internet population, and at a faster pace than ever before. And I don't just mean people coming on, getting a smartphone. I'm talking about people who are actually transacting, right? So if you look at online sales this Diwali versus last Diwali, you're looking at a 2x growth in 1 year, right? You're
Right.
looking at, I think it's supposed to be 50 million, 5 crore people will be transacting online at Diwali to buy Diwali gifts versus 2.8 crore last year. Now, this kind of a growth is sort of unprecedented at the Indian scale, right? And 99% of zip codes in India in the last 12 months have received at least one delivery online. 99%. That's massive
Very
coverage,
brilliant.
right?
Yeah.
So I don't think anybody predicted this, right? And at the start of COVID, while everything looked bleak and everything looked, we were really concerned about how things were going to work out. I think we're just coming. The digital economy is just coming out with flying colors, right? And I would be, I would say in the next by 2025, almost 20-25% of retail sales in India will be online. it took US almost 25 years to reach there. It'll probably take us less than 10, right?
Right.
So, which tells you exactly where things are headed. Now, online sales are not just about selling, like this shirt online, right? There's a lot of things that happen behind the scenes. There's a payment gateway where there are over 10 different entities involved, right? Everyone from Visa to MasterCard to the bank to the payment operators and two banks being involved. So there's a lot of infrastructure. Then the packaging company, then the logistics companies, then the customer service companies, the telecom companies. So think about everything else that is required to activate for one shirt to get sold from me to you.
Sure.
Right? And so therefore the entire business is going through a transformation. So many of these companies, coming back to the original question, is that they're forced into the change because the scale that has come in the last 6 months is unprecedented. I think what we were expecting in 2023-24 is happening today, right? So you obviously didn't plan for that. So many of them had to obviously change that, and they're dealing with the growth pains today. And therefore, it's not a pivot, it's just a change in mindset saying, hey, listen, remember that plan we created for 2023 and the Excel, and the investors are laughing, saying, that's never going to happen. Guess what is happening in 2021? And we need to prepare for it in the next 2 months, right? So there's one scenario. Some businesses just realize that, that they've completely got sidelined. Right?
Sure.
The whole thing going online and the way things are headed, video consumption in India is at an all-time high. Things like that. If you look at the IPL this year, most of the sponsors are startups, which is amazing, right? I mean, so if you look at all of that, and that's also because there's millions of people watching these games on a daily basis, and startup need they cannot obviously do offline advertising, so they're doing online advertising. So all of these now that's a pivot, right? If your entire business model was to manage hoardings outside, right, and nobody's outside, so do you not pivot, or you just keep saying I'm going to still put out a hoarding which is empty? So there are those kind of opportunities, and I think obviously edtech, which has been a very small part of my portfolio until now. We've made some edtech investments, have not had great experiences with it, but now I feel like those were all before time. It's almost saying those were BC, right? This was before COVID, right? and we're going to have one which is after COVID, and suddenly edtech is got the wind, and it's got the people, the class providers now are forced to use digital means. When all of that is happening, there's just so much flux. So how do you expect a business which is also a living organism, it grows and it must adjust? How can that just stay in one place, right? Even the biggest stones have to roll over in the face of a massive flood, right? So that's what's happening today.
No, and I think that is probably where you are headed to. I believe you set up Artha Ventures, which is, as you call, India's first micro VC fund.
Yeah.
And this sort of, in spite of having a family office, which would already be involved in startup deals and deal flow. What is the motivation behind this, and what are you trying to accomplish with this, Arigo?
So I'll first of all tell you that I was a very reluctant fund manager. So this was sort of one of those entrepreneurial opportunities. So Sudhir Sethi calls it, we're a venturepreneur at the end of the day.
Sure.
But this was something that I did not plan to do. I planned to just keep building my family office. I had a pretty solid thing going over there with investing in renewable energy projects, and then investing in startups and matching cash flows between them, right? which itself is a very interesting deal. But what I realized was, there was massive deterioration in what we would call an angel network in India. People were trying to create a business out of angel investment networks, and therefore there was an overall lack of, quality was going down, right? And I definitely felt that there would be, some you need to institutionalize for the founder, because what's happening was, you would be earlier. I mean, I'll just simplify. Earlier, it would take somewhere like 15 people to do a 2 crore round, right?
Sure.
Now it takes almost 40 people to do a 2 crore round. The problem is not that the 2 crore round is happening, is that the number of people involved goes up, which means the founder has way more responsibilities. There's now a herd mentality. So it's almost like a mob of people investing, but no one's taking control of the venture. So no one's actually spending time, because everybody's put in 2, 4, 4, 5 lakhs. It doesn't matter to their overall net worth. It's
Right.
just, it's a spray and pray approach. It's not helping the founder.
Sure.
Secondly, at the time when you're raising these institutional rounds, institutions don't want to deal with 50, 60, 70 investors sitting on a cap table, right? They don't want to see that. They're more interested. So they now want to, when they are doing Series A's or Series B's, instead of the business getting the money, 25% of the round goes in cleaning up the cap table. So in essence, the founder is also not getting future capital for himself. He's having to, raise money, but now he's also having to give exits to people himself from the rounds that he needs to grow his business.
Sure.
Right? So where is this a win-win? This is a win-lose relationship, right? Take money today to get screwed later. So
Right.
in that sense, I think, and the last point was that because there's so many people involved, these rounds also take longer to close, right? And yeah, some angel networks will do, power of attorneys and all, but trust me, it takes one investor to go to court and say that what happened with me was wrong, and suddenly those power attorneys will start disappearing. So how is it helping the founder? It is not helping the founder. What helps the founder is having, all this power under one name on the cap table. Having somebody who's going to spend time with him, because trust me, it's not about the money, it's about the time that the founder needs. And third is simplifying and being with the founder through multiple rounds, right? Because until he's ready for the Series A or the Series B round, you need to have an investor who will consistently put in the money if the company is performing. And angel networks are not doing that. This is a concept in the US where angel networks will do up to Series A. India mein aisa nahi hota, right? So I wanted a solution that solved all of these problems, made it easy for me to write checks into companies. And that's why, when a bunch of family offices that I was already working with, they said, "Ki boss, why don't you start a VC fund? We'll back it. It'll simplify us because we're now investing through a single structure. If there is any follow-on rounds, we'll come and write checks over there." And, I convinced my family office to come in. I convinced Madhu uncle's family office to come in. I convinced, a number of different family offices. We now have something like 40 family offices in our fund. So convinced all of them to come in. Sidbi came in, and we've created some really good magic, right? And I mean, thankfully, if you talk to our founders, you'll find out that we're an involved investor. We're very clear that if you need someone who's passive, never going to call you after giving you the money, we're not the guy, right? We are going to find out. We want to know what's happening because we're going to write 6 times more money in the follow-on round than what we wrote in the seed round with you guys. Correct. And for that, angel networks are not doing it. So that's why we created this. Now, where this is headed, so the next question, is we're trying to create a platform for fund managers in India. Eventually, what I expect to have, if you are asking me to crystal gaze 10 years later, I would imagine Artha Venture Fund would be probably a platform that has 50 fund managers managing over 100 funds through one platform, through one name, everybody having individual responsibility, individual funds. We're all working under one umbrella, but with individual funds, and Artha is only there to provide knowledge, provide a platform, provide back-end support. All the magic is on our venturepreneurs. We're just the co-working space for fund managers. Again, that's crystal gazing 10 years later. So maybe when we do this episode a couple of years later, you can follow up on that.
I'll definitely follow up. But you mentioned that 50 fund managers, 100 funds, and sort of placed down to different entrepreneurs. But in your experience, what has been your best and worst investment? Not necessarily with very specific names, but what has been your best and worst investment, and why?
Obviously, any investment that makes money sounds like a great investment. But I think instead of saying best and worst, I'll just talk about the biggest disappointments that I've probably had.
Sure.
Right? But I thought the venture could have done very well. Yeah, so I wouldn't rate investments as best and worst, right? I think what I would rather rate them as that what were the disappointments and satisfactory ones, right? So I think most satisfactory to me till date obviously has been Tala, right? And more so because it really was an impact investment when I made it. I was really in the thought that this is an impact investment. I'll be happy if I just get the capital back, because it was supposed to, credit score this all the unbanked people, bottom of pyramid, people that have trouble getting any kind of bank loans. But it's morphed into this amazing company that is that is positively affecting millions and millions of people across the world, and it's been a great investment, right? Even if you look at the numbers, as of the last round, we're sitting at almost an 80x kind of a return, and I would say that this company is going to return somewhere between 400 to 800x to the portfolio as a single company, and in 10 years that's going to be a great return for us, right? So in that sense, that's definitely the most satisfying investment in the 85, 90 odd investments that we've done till date. The most disappointing one, and simply because the potential that was there and we just could not capitalize, was Book My Cab. We were the first guys to come in with the radio taxi. We were the first ones to get a license from the RTO to operate a radio taxi. But the fact that we could not capitalize on that, and Ola and Uber, Taxi for sure, they all got a chance to come in and dominate the space.
Right.
I think that will, for nothing else, just the fact that we had the lead, we were the first ones, we had the licenses, we had everything going, right?
Sure.
And I think the fact that the founders and the investors could not capitalize on that will continue to be a disappointment.
Okay. So on getting into, as you said, first mover advantage, entry into startups, etc., is what is most talked about almost all the time, right? How does one decide to exit a startup?
I think everybody has different motivations. Last night I got a call about an exit from one of our portfolio companies, and a company that's doing very well, massive, great turnaround story. And what I was discussing with the person was like, do we really need to exit the company? And the question was that, do you or I need the liquidity today? Because the company is doing well. We've obviously been with the company through the tough times, and now that it's capitalizing, everybody wants to buy these shares. So we're okay getting the price for now, but are you and I really interested in exiting? I'm just giving you a gist of what the conversation that was going on.
Sure.
And I think it talks a lot about how people think about exits. And both of us came to the conclusion, honestly, we don't need the liquidity. But if someone gave me a crazy price, I still might look at exiting, right? So I think many times it's about that, right? So as long as the company is doing well, we want to stick around. You don't want to exit your winning companies, listed or unlisted, right? Doesn't matter.
Right.
Yes, if things are going wrong, if you're having differences with the entrepreneur or on the growth path of the company, whether it is a listed company or unlisted company, exit the company right away, right? Because if you have a fundamental issue with where the company is not going with the thesis that you created or have discussed with the founder, then get out. But if it's doing well, it's executing on the thesis, it's doing well with the execution, right? And it's growing. Why are you exiting? It makes no sense. It's like if you're in a great relationship, you love the person for everything that they are, and then you're saying I want to break up. It makes no sense, right? It's only when things are not working out, or there's that's the time when you want to exit something. Right? So in that sense, that's very important. At a fund level, I'll add that is that for us, when we start getting into below 10% ownership in a company after subsequent round, that is roughly the time when we'll start looking at exit. We want to be in double-digit ownerships in percentage terms at all times. So if we start getting into a position where getting lower on that, then we'll probably look at getting an exit.
Okay, fair. Anina, do you also outside of this fund also have Artha India Ventures, right? How does that fit into with this fund? Are they two sort of separate entities, or how does the play work out there?
Artha India Ventures is the sponsor of the fund. It's the GP into Artha Venture Fund. In terms of so earlier the strategy was tried and tested at Artha India Ventures before it became an Artha Venture Fund strategy. So now Artha India Ventures doesn't compete with the fund in this late seed to Series A kind of a structure, right? So
okay.
Over there, the right of first refusal is with the fund. So even if it comes to the family office, the fund looks at it first, and if it says no, then the fund, Artha India Ventures only do it if the fund has said no, the team is not going to do it.
Sure.
Then they could look at doing it.
Okay.
Yeah. So but what the family office is doing now is we're trying to try some different strategies which could later on become AVF strategies for us. AVF is Artha Venture Fund. So we're now looking at writing cross-border checks. We're getting relationships with Israel, we're getting relationships in Southeast Asia, in Africa,
Right.
with the intent at some point we could do a cross-border fund with some smart fund managers from there, and we could also become a GP in those funds, that kind of stuff. We're also looking at writing some late-stage bridge checks. We're doing some Series A bridges, Series B bridges. So Dipanshu is working very hard on that, and that could eventually become a strategy for us. And then maybe somebody from the family office either moves over and becomes the fund manager, or we'll find a fund manager to execute. Either which way, we'll create those fund managers internally. So I think the essentially Artha India Ventures then becomes sort of a petri dish that will create strategies, test them out, have the data, and then have people that will go execute on that strategy, either internally or externally.
Got it. Very interesting. So I think we've almost reached the end of this conversation. What is that one piece of advice that you would give to a budding VC?
Like a new VC or
a new VC, someone who wants to get, and you guys run a very hot sort of sector, and everyone that I talk to, whether it's a client, wants to try and find the next Flipkart or Oyo or all these companies which have done well. What is that one piece of advice you'd give to them?
Discipline, right? I think be very, very clear on the principles on which you'll make an investment. Be very, very clear on the strategy you're going to make an investment in with, and be patient. Just because you're not doing deals doesn't mean you start changing your strategy. If it's working and it made you a fund manager, then obviously, sometimes you're going to have very lean periods. And I think many times young VCs, because they've got the capital, they've got, they're ready to go, they go out and start making investments, even if it doesn't fit with the thesis that they had pitched.
Sure.
And I think, we have a lot of history, obviously, there's a lot of benchmarking now available, which shows that when you've done that, it's not, when you start getting outside of thesis and start making investments there, sure, you're gonna, you end up getting results that you haven't predicted, right?
Got it.
Be very patient, right? Just because you're not getting enough deal flow or not getting enough deals to close, doesn't mean that you need to, change the strategy. If it's worked in the past and you're sure about the strategy, you've got your core principles in place, it doesn't matter. Be patient, because opportunities, when they show up,
right?
I mean, I was talking to Ajay Atangri recently. I had him on my show as well, and he was talking about luck. And I said, Ajay, the point is that honestly, Ajay, you were prepared, right? You persevered, and then the opportunity showed up. Therefore, everything massive became luck. But if the opportunity shows up and you've already deployed all your capital, and you're trying to harvest what is not harvestable anymore, it's not unlucky. It's just you weren't prepared. You weren't patient enough, right? So patience, perseverance, and hard work is required for opportunities to create luck.
Oh, fair. Super one. Thank you again so much for your time. Hopefully you had as much fun as we did. This was definitely one of the different conversations that we had, because you're obviously more focused on the private side. And so, thank you for your time. I'm sure you are discussing multiple opportunities on your table as we speak. And here's wishing you and Artha the best of luck for the next decade, and hopefully more Decacons in your stable.
Thank you very much, Jay. I really enjoyed the conversation. It was very interesting to be on the other side of a rapid fire round. Super. And answering questions. I wish you, your viewers, everybody a very happy Diwali, a very happy New Year. I think we've got an amazing opportunity with the Indian economy. So let's stick around, let's stick together, and let's make some magic happen. And Trump, bye then.
See you. Bye.